Today is January 4th, 2012. My name is Dr. Michael Berna, and I'm here today on behalf of the Library of Congress's Veterans History Project, a project that captures and archives the oral histories of the men and women who served in one or more of our nation's conflicts. We are in Monessen, Pennsylvania, at the Monessen Heritage Museum today to interview Miss Nancy Horvath, a veteran of the United States Navy Waves. Welcome, Ms. Horvath, and thank you for agreeing to share your military experiences with the rest of the nation.
You're more than welcome.
Ms. Horvath, let's start with some background information about you, beginning when and where you were born.
I was born here in Monessen, June 11th, 1935, and parents are both deceased. I have 4 siblings and graduated from high school here in Monessen. And I had always wanted to go into the military for the last couple of years of high school. We had talked to recruiters, and that's what really got me interested. They sounded like it was a good life to lead.
The recruiters did a very good job.
They did indeed. It delayed me, but I think I tried to talk myself out of it because friends of mine who were going to wait for me and join up with me, they chickened out. So for the first year out of school, I was just going from one job to another, but I finally went ahead with it, and in January, actually it was January 17th of 1954 that I enlisted. Not a good time to have boot camp in Baltimore, Maryland. It was just so cold. Blustery winter weather that only Baltimore had. It was quite an experience.
And how did you get from Monessen to Baltimore?
Bus. They provided bus transportation, and I went off without a fanfare. And see ya. My mother was way ahead of her time. She thought the kids should leave the nest. She encouraged all of us to do it. And several of us did. Yeah, she was a pretty special lady. She trusted us. She felt she raised us well enough. She trusted us to go off on our own, and we did, and did well. We all succeeded in our own way. So it was great. It was great. Boot camp wasn't so great, but I had fun anyway.
Were you the only member of your family to join the armed forces?
No, I have an older brother. He's 13 months older. He went into the Air Force at 17. He wasn't much for school and decided he was getting into enough trouble. He'd go into the military, and he made a career of the military. Retired after 20 plus years. He loved it. He loved it. And the younger brother went into the Army. Didn't make a career of it. He was happy enough to get out.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So where did the patriotism begin in your family? How is it it seemed that 3 of you out of the 4 went to the military? So was there? Now, you remember growing up during World War II? So
yeah, the tail end of that.
Right.
And my dad was an air raid warden. Whether that had some influence, I don't know. But he was, because he couldn't go into the military, he tried to enlist, but he had 5 children, and they wouldn't take him. And my mother just, oh, shucks, because his work wasn't very steady. So she was thinking of the paycheck would have been a lot more regular than what he was accustomed to. Mm-hmm. But I think it might have started with that. My dad always showed respect for the flag, our flag, my flag. I take great pride in my flag. And my mother, they observed the holidays, the national holidays. I guess it must have started at home. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, in school, we pledged to the flag. Mm-hmm. That was part of our growing up. I'm not sure what else it was, except it was almost inborn, maybe inbred, but we all had it. we all still have it. All 5 kids are very conscious of what our country means, and we love the flag. It's just, I never thought about where it started, but apparently parenting had a lot to do with it, because they showed the first signs of respect, and we just carried on.
And so when you took the bus, did you take the bus out of Monessen to
Pittsburgh?
To Pittsburgh. Okay, and then from Pittsburgh you went to Baltimore?
By bus again.
Okay. And you said you arrived in January when it was very cold.
Very cold.
Right?
Very cold, yeah. And we had, my mother was quite concerned because I also was a bit of a rebel and didn't like taking orders. I wasn't the best behaved girl in school. I just thought everything was fun. You should make people laugh. That was what I liked to do. So she thought being in the military with being told what to do would clash with my personality, and I would just buckle. But I thrived on it. Apparently, I needed the discipline that the military offered because I loved it. Never objected to being told what to do. I did it gladly. It was very strange because it was a real change in my attitude. But as I said, I thrived on it. It was good for me.
What was your first impression when you arrived at boot camp?
First impression? Boy, you're taxing me. That's about 100 years ago. First impression. It reminded me of the movies I'd seen with the barracks, because they were the old wooden floored, cold looking barracks. I don't remember being upset with it. It was just the way it was. I don't remember having any good, bad impression. It was there, and it was what I had to do, and I was willing. And I had fun. I had fun. I always had fun.
You did?
I did. You know,
Okay.
we made fun out of nothing.
Okay.
Even scrubbing the wooden floors with a brush as part of our punishment for someone having a couple of hairs in their brush. But yeah, it was always fun. It's always fun.
And you got to meet people from everywhere,
everywhere.
in boot camp. That was an experience
That
outside
was
of
that was
Monessen.
the first time I had met people with different accents, the Southerns and the New Yorkers, and just, yeah, that was fascinating to hear these different accents that people had. It was fun knowing different people. They always had something to say, something new. You know, I was always a wise person. I thought, you know, at 18 I knew everything. 19 I knew even more. But I learned a lot from them. And it was a real learning process, of course, because we were put through all kinds of things. My hardest thing was getting up at Reveille. I had a hard time. But I had a bunkmate down below. She used to get her feet and just kick me out of the bunk. That's the only way I'd wake up. And I always was late running, getting dressed and all. But everything we giggled about. It was funny that one girl had to go home because she was so terribly homesick. And I just couldn't understand that. I mean, with all these people around, how can you be homesick? But unfortunately she was, and she was quite sad. But the rest of us, we seemed to get along quite well. It was good. It was good.
And how about the physical demands of boot camp?
That really didn't bother me a lot because I had always been active. I'd always ran to school for obvious reasons. I was a cheerleader, so I was active in school. The one thing I did find was a problem. I was not a very good eater. I was very picky. So to fill up, I would eat the bread and jelly and cookies and drink the milk off other people's trays because I didn't like half the food that was served. Thank goodness since then I've learned to eat a lot of things, but that particular time of my life was the fastest I ever gained weight other than being pregnant. I gained about 17 or 18 pounds in 9 weeks.
That's a lot.
That's a lot. My mother had an expression. She said, "You look like a pig ready to butcher." She wasn't very complimentary, but she made her point.
She was direct.
Very direct.
Right.
Very direct.
Right.
But yeah, when they fit us for our uniforms, I didn't understand why they were going up so big, because we had these very lovely shorts that we wore for working out, and I think they gave me a size 12 or 14, and at that time that was huge. They were falling off almost. Well, by the end of boot camp, I could barely button the shorts, so I got real healthy, real healthy.
And you were there for 9 weeks?
9 weeks.
9 weeks, okay. And then after the 9 weeks, then what?
We then had a choice of different schools, and I decided to go to school for air traffic control. So there was a school, a peace school, they called it, prior to that was in Jacksonville, Florida. So that was my first stop. And
what is peace school?
You know, I don't remember what it was called. I mean, why it was called that. Was it a preparatory?
But what did you learn there?
All different kinds of aircraft, the ships. We learned different things, which I don't remember now, but we studied that a lot. All things connected with the Navy, the ships in the air, you know, all phases. That was only a 6 or 9 week course. Then from there, let me tell you about the Florida trip. First airplane ride, first view of the ocean, and the first time I saw an orange growing on a tree. And I've never forgotten the thrill of all those. And that was taking an orange off a tree, breaking it open, and all that juice running down your arm. That was so exciting to me.
Right.
It was a big kick. Then, though, the sad part of that trip, I'll never forget either. I wasn't aware of how much bigotry existed. And when I went to Florida, of course, a southern state, I dressed up an older black woman who was sitting in the airport, and she was quite surprised that I spoke to her, being a white person addressing her. And I asked her where the restroom was. She directed me to the white restroom and the white water fountain, and that stunned me. It still brings tears to my eyes to think that there was so much segregation, that this poor little old lady couldn't drink from the same fountain I did. I was still a young kid, but it was obviously hurtful and wrong, so wrong. And I think about that often when I read stories now about the prejudices that exist, and unfortunately it still does, hopefully not to that extent, but yeah, I remember that so well.
And that wasn't like that in Monessen, was it? Even though there were blacks and whites in Monessen, when you were growing up, it was different, wasn't it?
Well, they were separated, but I wasn't aware of why. I thought we all chose to be where we were. I wasn't aware then that blacks weren't allowed to swim in the public pool. Didn't know that. I thought they didn't like to swim. I was very ignorant of that aspect. And it apparently wasn't talked about in my house.
Mm-hmm.
I'd have developed some prejudices, but I didn't.
Mm-hmm.
I just was totally unaware,
Mm-hmm.
totally unaware of what was going on.
Mm-hmm. So, and this was in Florida when you first
When I
experienced,
first experienced
this
yeah,
bigotry.
Yeah, and it was so harsh,
Mm-hmm.
so harsh.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, obviously it stayed with you all of these years.
Oh my, yes. Yeah.
Yes, yes. And so your reaction to that, you were saddened by that. Is there anything, did you see, as you spent your time in Florida, any changes in that, or did that remain like that until you left Florida?
I was there such a short time
Right.
that, and I was not exposed to the civilian life very much. We were
Okay.
on base
Mm-hmm.
the majority of the time.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Mm-hmm. And your schooling was every day?
yeah, every day,
And,
weekends off.
Weekends off?
Hmm.
Okay.
We usually had Marines and sailors as instructors, and then from Florida went to Olathe, Kansas. That doesn't exist anymore. It was on the border between, it was Olathe, Kansas, Missouri. It was right on the border, and it was a pretty desolate place. But the school was intense.
It was intense?
Intense.
Much more intense than Florida?
Oh my, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Because you realize you're responsible for the lives of pilots and passengers, and the expense of all the aircraft that's in the air. And I found out after about halfway through, I didn't have the temperament for air traffic control. During a mock-up session, the instructor was pretending that he was different aircraft. This is SNB 345, needing landing instructions. Then he'd come up with an SOS and a fire in the cockpit and a couple other things, and I'm supposed to be giving landing instructions, and all I did was and he came into the room screaming, "Kerns, you know what you just did? You destroyed all this money, $4 million, and all these lives, and I'm sorry." It was not my cup of tea, so I ended up working in dispatch, which was safer for them and me. But,
so you did that by choice, then you went to dispatch, or did they assign you to dispatch?
It was still part of the schooling, but that was one phase of it. At my first duty station, I worked in dispatch.
Okay.
We were told, though, that, I forget the percentage, it was a great percentage of people who graduated from the school
Mm-hmm.
within 6 months of being at a public airport, that they would suffer a nervous breakdown because there was so much pressure.
Mm-hmm.
And it happened with our group. There was a couple who were discharged and went to LaGuardia, and one of them did, within 6 months, suffer a nervous breakdown. So the things that, I guess the equipment they now have is probably a lot, well, I know it's a lot better after 60 years, but I'm sure it's still a lot of pressure when you realize that all this is in your hands and you control everything that's in the air, and it's overwhelming to me. I mean, it still is, to see what they do. It's amazing.
So school lasted how long here?
That was 3 months.
3 months. And then you were qualified to do dispatch after that?
I was qualified to do both, but I know me. I knew myself well enough to know I couldn't handle the tower. I couldn't be in the tower.
So then after you finished school then, where next?
That was at Quonset Point, Rhode Island.
Okay.
And that was my first official duty station. I was married while I was stationed there. I had come home for a weekend and had become reacquainted with the boy I had been dating in high school. And the butterflies went all over again, and we ended up deciding to get married. in November of 55. He was going to school at Penn State. I was in the military. At the time we planned it, a female could be discharged after having served 6 months after the last school. After we made the plans, the rule was changed. You had to serve 1 year after your last school. Well, we waited. I waited in the service. I didn't have a choice. I couldn't get out. So I was there a few months after we were married. I had a commanding officer. I'm getting ahead of myself. I went from dispatch to aerology because there was a young man in dispatch who we clashed terribly. I mean, he had me, and he was my superior, so I had to obey, but he had me doing chores that had nothing to do with dispatch. Just anything and everything he could to antagonize. And instead of settling it, I was sent to aerology so I could learn. I learned to plot weather maps and that sort of thing, but I wasn't qualified. I didn't have the schooling, so I tried to take the test, but I didn't pass it because I didn't have the background.
To become an aerologist.
Yeah, it's intensive schooling, which I didn't have. So I was betwixt and between. I was out of AC, but I was not in AG, and I could do neither. I wasn't a jack of all trades. I was certainly not a master. I couldn't do either one well enough to take and pass an exam to become a third class. So I was discharged as just an airman. But that was a fascinating course, a fascinating office to work in. And I was the one who delivered the weather reports to the different ships that were docked in Newport. And that was interesting. My commanding officer he referred to himself as a black Irishman, Lieutenant Commander Kramer. I've tried to find his name on the internet. So far I haven't had any luck, but he was very kind to me. I used to babysit for them. We had 2 little girls, and after we had been married, he offered us, my then husband and I, he offered us his home for a weekend, that my ex could come up and spend some time with me, which was quite nice of him to do that, because he knew we were poor. I was in the lowest branch of, not the lowest branch, but the lowest rank of the Navy, and my ex was in school, so obviously didn't have money. So we did spend one weekend with them, which was great. And the 2 little kids, they were super nice. And then when I was discharged, then I joined Dick at Penn State. We found an apartment there, and I got pregnant, and we had to leave because we were in student housing off campus, and they didn't want to have a crying baby in that situation with students trying to study, so I had to leave, and I came back to Menneson and stayed with my in-laws through the rest of the pregnancy, and that's why my son was born at the Charleroi Menneson Hospital, because I was living there at the time, or in Menneson. So I didn't have their dad with me, but I had my mother and my mother-in-law in the labor room. Oh, that was delightful. That was delightful. That was quite an experience, with Dr. Kerns, my mother, saying, "You're not going to have this baby. Your pains aren't long enough." And my mother-in-law, all she did was run to the bathroom. She couldn't take it. And me, I think I was in labor, oblivious to what they were doing. Was told about this later, but I had my son without his dad being present because he was in the middle of taking finals in February. Richard was born on Valentine's Day. So that was a nice little present.
I'd say. Let's back up to your time in the military. So how long were you in the military?
Total time was just about 2.5 years.
2.5 years.
I had a 4-year enlistment. I really wanted to stay, but I was talked out of it.
Okay.
I thought that was my obligation. I thought I should have stayed the 4 years. But
So where did you spend most of that 2.5 years? Where was your longest stint?
I guess that Quants was probably, I don't know, because I was in such a short time. 9 weeks of boot camp, 6 weeks here, 3 months. Probably Quonset Point was the longest.
And what was your daily routine like there?
We worked shifts there because...
All 3 shifts?
Because the aircraft came in and out constantly, and they had to have dispatchers they had to file forms before they could take off. We had to make sure this information was correct. The flight number, the plane number, the pilot's name, destination, estimated time of arrival, all what area they were flying over. It was pretty complicated as far as what all had to be on the form. It was quite detailed. And I enjoyed doing that. But like I said, I was moved out of there rather abruptly. But with the aerology, that was where we worked the shifts mainly. And we had 3 shifts. I can't remember if we worked them a week at a time. I can't recall. I just know we worked different shifts.
And this was peacetime?
Yes.
This was post Korea?
Almost.
Okay.
When I went in, we were still in Korea. But by the time I came out, we were out of there.
And so was Eisenhower the president or Truman? Eisenhower? Okay, so this was near the end of the Korean conflict
the end,
then. Okay. And so you went in, you had known about Korea, the Korean conflict when you first enlisted.
Correct.
And so at that point in time, how did you? What were your feelings about the Korean conflict?
I didn't understand it then. I still don't understand it all. I don't know that anybody did. We talked about it during our different sessions, and none of the girls seemed to understand. I guess we were all pretty ignorant of. We didn't follow the news as we do today. That might have been part of it, but just hearing from our parents that they didn't approve of it, we felt the same way because we didn't understand it. We knew that we had been told, had heard how vicious it was, how cruel that the North Koreans were and what they were doing to the South Koreans, and that I remember hearing, the torture and just horrible things that through the grapevine we had heard some stories from guys who had been there, but to understand it and have an opinion, I can't say I did.
Why do you think your parents were so against that? Now, this was a time that wasn't long after World War II.
No, and that was the big thing, because they remembered it so well, and it hurt them a lot. And the rationing and that sort of thing, although that was minor, but just the fact that there were boys being killed, and that we'd have our neighbors had the little stars in the windows indicating that they had children in the military, in the war, and there were some local people who were killed, and that was the big thing with my mother, because of all these young men. Why are they being killed in another country? World War II, they understood. We all understood that because we were attacked. But we weren't attacked by North Korea. Why are we fighting against them? That was hard to understand.
And from what I understand, from what I read, the mood of the country in general was very saddened or against that conflict.
And I think a lot of it has to do with the World War II. They were so totally different. The reasons were so different.
Mm-hmm.
When you're attacked,
Mm-hmm.
you have to fight back.
Mm-hmm.
But when you're not attacked, what's the point? You know, it was difficult to grasp.
Was there a sense against the presidency for being involved in this conflict to make that decision?
I don't remember that
Don't
being
remember that.
No, I don't remember it being a big thing.
Mm-hmm.
I guess we weren't. I hate to admit it, but I was not well informed. Being that young, I was pretty self-serving, and
Well, as you said too, the media was a lot different then than it is now.
oh, we heard everything. We hear everything that goes on now.
Right.
Then they I don't know if they camouflaged or they allowed us just certain things to hear.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
They weren't there.
Mm-hmm.
Now, my goodness, they're right on the lines with our soldiers,
Mm-hmm.
and how many have been killed covering these conflicts.
Mm-hmm.
It's just that when you're hit at home, it just puts you in a different mindset. And that Pearl Harbor just blew everybody away. I mean, that was just an unheard of thing to happen, and that didn't happen with Korea. There was no mass destruction against the U.S. Didn't make sense.
Hmm.
We just lost how many thousands of people.
Mm-hmm.
Why do we have to do this again?
Mm-hmm. How do you see any similarities or feel any similarities between what happened at the World Trade Center and the bombing of Pearl Harbor?
Oh, I do. I do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because we were attacked on our soil.
Mm-hmm.
That's just a no-no.
Mm-hmm.
Can't do that without retaliation.
Mm-hmm. Going back to the stars in the window, I hadn't heard that before. So, anyone that had someone in the military had a star?
Small, little white background, and it had a little gold ribbon, and they'd hang it in their window, indicating that they had someone in the military.
Mm-hmm.
And the gold stars were the ones who lost, and they put those in the window also.
Mm-hmm.
So there were a lot of windows in this town that had the stars, because it's a very patriotic area. It used to be.
Mm-hmm.
And when we went to war, I mean, people, they were lying about their ages to get in. I'll get those Japs. You know, they were just gung ho to fight back.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But you don't have that same enthusiasm. Although the few I've talked to who've been in Iraq said they would go back again and again, so they know something I don't know,
Mm-hmm.
or they understand what I don't understand,
Mm-hmm.
because they're willing to fight to the end.
Mm-hmm. Now, you said something before when you were talking about you didn't understand what the conflict was in Korea because it was so totally different. And then at the end of the Korean conflict, there was very little change in the country. The 38th parallel was still where it was.
Existed, yeah.
And so then, what were the comments or thoughts about that not much changed except for the loss of lives?
That's exactly what was said. That was all that I ever heard.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing changed.
Right.
And it didn't. And it still hasn't.
Mm-hmm.
And here we go again.
Mm-hmm.
They're threatening again.
Mm-hmm.
But that's what wasn't... It's hard enough to try to grasp any meaning behind the conflict. And then afterwards to see absolutely nothing changed. Why then? Why did we lose all those young men?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm sure they lost women too, because the nurses were on the front lines as well. So I don't know. It was another senseless conflict, as far as I can see.
Now, when during the time you were in the military, it was somewhere around that time that Eisenhower introduced the idea of doing away with the segregation.
Yeah.
And tell us what you remember about that.
It did not affect us. We didn't have any blacks in our company. I wasn't exposed to, I think, one black female in the military in the first couple of years. I don't know why. So it never directly affected me. There was still enough bigotry around that I heard a lot, didn't like the idea of dropping that barrier.
Mm-hmm.
But then there were some of us who, said, well, it's about time, but took how long before it really went into play?
Mm-hmm.
Many years after that.
Mm-hmm.
He tried.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't go very far.
No, not at the beginning it didn't. It took a while, as you say, and for both men and women at
yes.
that point in time. Mm-hmm.
And boy, they proved themselves, didn't they?
They certainly did, didn't they? The record speaks for itself.
It does, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Very brave and great service to the
What are
country.
they going to do? They can't shoot anybody down.
Mm-hmm.
And their record was astounding.
Mm-hmm.
The black pilots.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, particularly the Tuskegee Airmen.
Tuskegee, oh my gosh, yes.
Mm-hmm. So there had to be this awareness that you're talking about of this changing, of you watching this happening, this occurring from a time when they were disallowed to the point that they became honorable, brave, decorated men. That had to have some sort of effect, or at least something you noticed.
But that wasn't brought forth as a big deal till later.
Okay.
The publicity wasn't there.
Mm-hmm.
We heard very little about the Tuskegee Airmen at that time, which was surprising.
Mm-hmm.
I heard very little. I remember hearing about it, but not to the extent that I've since read and learned about.
Mm-hmm.
And I also spent the time, what little time in the military, a lot of it in the South. And there were a lot of Southern people there in the military, and they still had the same beliefs they were born with.
Mm-hmm.
Kansas, I didn't associate too much with the public, and we were a small group, so it was hard to feel anything from those people because they were kind of neutral, as I recall.
Mm-hmm.
New Yorkers are probably, I don't know how accepting they were, but they were just different. I do not remember discussion about blacks in the military to any length. I don't remember though, but that's a few years ago.
Well, you said something earlier about how you were taught to be independent as you were growing up, and you entered the military, and of course you were with all these other females in the service now. Was there some sort of sense of pride that you were females in the military at that point in time?
Yes, there was. Yes, there was.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Tell us a little about that.
That, I do remember that because we had a wide variety of ages from, well, there were younger ones than me. I was 18 and a half, some 17, 18, right after high school. Then there were, in boot camp, a few older women. They were in their, one was almost 30. And she just decided that she was going to do something to make her proud, to be who she was. And I thought that was, she felt that she was, I guess, next to nothing until she put on the uniform, and she wore it very proudly. Do remember her. Can't remember her name, but I still see her face. A very tall, dark-haired girl, but she was very proud. And it was something that she thought about and just cast it aside, but decided that she wanted to be somebody. And that was her way of doing it. I remember sensing that the ones that I knew were all proud to be females in the military. Because we used to talk about, I wonder what they did. I wonder what it was like when they were in, because there were so few military females that we knew. I didn't know any personally. Well, these outfits are a lot nicer than what they wore before, and our uniforms were designed by a famous, what was the word?
Famous fashion designer.
Fashion designer.
Yes.
And not too many. No, who could claim that? Nobody.
Right.
Then after we sported our new uniforms in the Marine Corps, they always come up to the rear. And they had to show off their new uniforms, but they didn't have any nice ones till probably in the mid-50s.
And that was Mrs. Roosevelt had nudged President Roosevelt to do that.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
So that was nice to have a fashionable uniform.
It was. And they were nice. They were very nice uniforms. I wish I could fit into mine.
We all wish that. But so then you remember then the sense of when they kind of reconstituted women in the military and began with the waves and kind of commissioned them. Not only were you in the military now in the U.S. Navy, but you were equal with men, and that was a first for women in the military.
Big first.
Or in the Navy.
Yes, they were able to take any of the classes, go to any of the schools that the men did, any of them. Radar, corpsman, anything and everything. They were all open to both. And at one time, of course, when they first started, they weren't. They were limited, very limited. The only restriction that was still in effect with me at that time was I wouldn't be shipped overseas, couldn't go to an overseas station because I was neither 21 nor did I have a rating. And you had to be a certain rank before, or 21, before you could go overseas. Okay. They were still trying to protect the females, which isn't such a bad idea.
Right.
Right. But they fought for their rights, and now they're fighting on the front lines with the men. And I mean, more power to them. They are equal.
But at that particular point in time, that the fact that you were able to take over a lot of the what were formerly male jobs enabled and allowed the males to go and fight on the battlefront.
I think that was the basic idea. I'm sure it was, because there were too many of the stateside or shoreside jobs that were being done by males. And since women weren't allowed to fight, absolutely I'm sure that was their main goal. And it worked, because it did relieve more men to fight the battle.
And there were probably instances where some of the men were not too happy that they had to leave their stateside job to go to the forefront.
No. I think that's why the resentment was with me, because those jobs weren't done by females. The dispatchers and the tower, most of them were men. All the jobs were done by men, so we found that we could be just as good. So there was resentment. Well, just resentment in general about women being in the military existed.
Tell a little more about
I remember I remember friends trying to talk me out of going into the military, and they would come up with these awful stories to try to convince me otherwise, that I shouldn't go, because in boot camp I heard them talking to the females and they were saying this, that, cursing and calling them foul names, and I can't do that. Oh yes, I heard them. So they didn't want me to go in. And they made up the stories, because if you were caught cursing, you were reprimanded. So I was never cursed at. By men or women. Instructors, that they just didn't do that. Not the men, that's a different story. I've heard some tall tales, and I'm sure you have too, about the men and their DIs and how they were talked to.
Mm-hmm.
But they treated us, they may have yelled, but they still treated us with respect. The females were still set aside in that respect. They were not treated like a jarhead. They weren't treated like the men.
Mm-hmm.
They still kept that female presence alive, the respect that men show toward women, and just women in general, let alone women in uniform. So I can't ever say that I was not treated with respect by the instructors. Never.
Now, were you surprised by that, or did you take note of that, or did you realize then that these people were lying to you?
I thought they were exaggerating, but I thought there might have been some truth to it, and found that they were totally off base. There was no sign of any of that. Even the girl I mentioned in boot camp who was homesick, they didn't ride her about it. They didn't torture and torment her, and I'm sure they would have with the men. They were very sympathetic and kind, and talked to her like a mother would talk to a daughter. They're very compassionate. We were still females. Still females, and I like that. Although I like being equal, I always fight for my own. And I've been independent most of my life, 3/4 of it, and I like it. But I still like being treated like a female.
Was there a sense amongst the women of it's us against the men, or was it more of a sense of it's us along with the men?
It varied. It was a little of both, depending on the situation.
Okay.
Yeah, there were some times, most of the time it was, in school it was, we can do better than they can, kind of thing. But
some competition
yeah,
there.
yeah. It was not real serious, but it was there. I don't know about the width. I didn't experience that so much, because we were in a small office setting with the weather and, well, both, every phase of the work I did. So we didn't experience that. There wasn't that high competition, because we were all in it together.
When you talked about your superior when you were a dispatcher who didn't treat you very well, do you think that he had resentment? Do you think that was the basis
I think so.
of his action?
I think so. Looking back. Well, at the time I thought so too. That's why I thought that our superior would have done something about it instead of just separating us. That was unfair. If I knew then what I know now, I wouldn't have taken it. I'd have demanded I be kept in the same position and he be reprimanded, or at least talked to and told to, leave well enough alone and treat her with respect, as you would any military person.
Sure.
And they didn't handle it that way. So the bias was existing, because our superior was older, so from another generation. And that generation, they weren't too keen on, generally speaking, weren't too keen on women in the military. Seems that the men who served were the ones who were least likely to accept the females in the military for some reason. You'd think it'd be the opposite, but that was the sense I had.
Well, let's go then towards the end of your military career. Now, you said you served 2.5 years as opposed to the 4 years. How did the decision to leave the military come about? Was that your decision or the military's decision?
It wasn't the military. They allowed, that was a change. At one time, if you were married, you had to get out. But that was no longer the case. You just had to serve that certain length of time after school. So they didn't do that. Actually, it wasn't me. It was my then husband who encouraged me to get out. Like I said, I wish I'd stayed because I thoroughly enjoyed it. But, you know, woulda, coulda, shoulda always exists.
What did it feel like when you were actually discharged and came back home?
I didn't like that.
No?
No. I was sad.
Really?
I was sad. I never thought about it, but I was sad getting out. Even though I had something to look forward to. I was pregnant later, but I was saddened just by the whole aspect of not belonging anymore.
To the military?
Yeah.
Okay. Because of that patriotism?
I think that had a lot to do with it. To this day, that's why I wish I could wear my uniform. I think that's probably why I joined the shipmates.
Okay.
It's still a uniform. But the flag is very important to me. Very. I still look at all the flags in town, and if they're afraid, I make sure I let them know that my flag should not be flown that way. It has to be intact. Surprisingly enough, they listen and they do change it, which is great.
Well, your mother and father would be very proud of you to know that about you, that you, as much as they honored the flag, and to know that you honor the flag.
I think so. Yeah, and my kids too, and a couple of my well, I said one was in the police work, but he's also in the Air National Guard, so he shares my patriotism. I mean, he is without a doubt one of the most patriotic people I know, and that makes me extremely proud.
I'm sure.
And he wears his uniform, shoulders back, you know. Oh yeah, I just grin from ear to ear when I see him. You know, I want to salute him. He looks great. Yeah, and I don't think it's anything you can be told either. I think it's just here. It's here. And it's always been like that. And I'm happy to say so is my grandson.
Well, I must say your patriotism and your service and commitment to your country is commendable, and it's so wonderful to hear how much you enjoyed your time in the military. As we near the conclusion of the interview, what is it that you would like to say? What would you like to add to this interview?
Regarding the military, I've always wanted one of my kids or grandkids to go into the military. I would always want them to experience patriotism at its fullest. I mean, when you're in the military, they can call it brainwashing if you want, but they teach you, they try hard to teach you respect of the flag and our country. And we don't have that today. Our young people today are void of that. And that's sad. That is so very sad. That's why I would love to see the draft again. Because, number one, it would give the young people jobs, get them off the streets, maybe get them away from the drugs, teach them about respect and self-respect, and respecting their country, and be willing to do more for it, like be a good citizen. And they don't have that. They don't have anywhere to go. And who's going to teach them? And that's what I think is sorely lacking. If you respect anything higher than yourself, anything, it's bound to affect the way you feel about yourself. Because it takes that I, me away a little bit. But that's the only thing I can add. I just think that we're very lacking in respect and love of country and the younger people. I wish I could change it. I wish I could change that.
I'll tell you, Miss Horvath, you do not lack respect for your country. You are very patriotic, and on behalf of our nation, I commend you for your service to our country and appreciate the effort that you've made forward to help our country move forward and to share with others your experiences so that they can learn from what your experience was all about, and hopefully take that to a level where they may start to raise their level of patriotism.
I hope so.
We thank you for coming here today. We appreciate that.
Thank you very much.
That concludes our interview for today. Thank you very much.
How nice.